So then on your return, you might decide, I'm done with this property investing. And your portfolio is worth $4 million. When you left, it was worth $2 million. You only had a complete mortgage of $1.5 million. You could potentially sell one property and have no mortgage and a few bucks left over. Good problem to have. Hello, hello, hello. It's not where you start, ladies and gentlemen. It's where you finish. I'm Anthony Gafa, and you're watching Unfiltered with Gafa. The most common question I get asked, and it's fitting to talk about it now, halfway through the podcast series. What happens if I have a change of heart and I want to go on holidays? What happens if I need to go away because I want to get married? What happens if I just want to go on a European holiday and potentially not come back? Well, if you played your cards right, let's just say you bought a house with a granny flat and you put a granny flat in it. Or you bought yourself an apartment, or both. Now, 5 years ago, if you've purchased a house in say, the Hawkesbury region, or Brisbane for that matter, or Melbourne, you might have paid $700,000. And then you've decided to put in a granny flat, so you've loaded up on a bit more debt. Well, by far, the granny flat is covering its own expenses, and there's some surplus cash. And as far as the house goes, if you'd listened, you'd give it a lick of paint and a bit of carpet, and the rent will now be covering the mortgage. You might have been, after installing a granny flat and constructing a granny flat from a property you bought 5 years ago for $800,000, knocked up a granny flat, you might have a mortgage of $650,000, $700,000. Well, that mortgage is costing you $45,000, $50,000 a year. If that property is not returning more than $1,000 a week, you took the wrong advice. It's very difficult to get a rental property for under $800 a week wherever you go. And then you've got a 2-bedroom granny flat pulling in an extra $600 a week. Now your biggest problem is deciding where you're going on holidays. Because if you decide to take a year off the whole investing thing and maybe quit your job, the property's going to be working in your favour. It's going to be positively cash flowed. There's going to be a surplus of funds. So you can decide whether the additional funds go into the property or they assist you on your holiday. Oh, but I only bought an apartment a year ago. Well, as long as you purchased an apartment in the right location, let's just say that you spent $700,000 a couple of years ago and you bought a 1-bedder. And you took my advice and you made it a 2-bedder. Now, at $700,000, you've only got a mortgage of $600,000 at worst. So if you can't come up with the $30,000, $40,000 in interest, you've invested pretty poorly, because the rent alone will cover the mortgage, and it will leave you some dollars left over to make some extra payments, or for the apartment, some extra money aside to cover the additional strata costs or the other rates that you're paying on a quarterly basis. So it's not all doom and gloom if you change your strategy, or if there's a change in your health, or you want to go on holidays. The properties now can wash their own face. You're not going to have an issue with being able to maintain the properties. And worst case scenario, you decide to go a 5-star holiday, not live within your means like we spoke about. So you're now living above your budget. Well, not only will the properties wash their own face, cover their own expenses, there will be some surplus funds left over that can go towards funding your holiday. That's why having a strategy and jumping in come hand in hand because you didn't fuck around, you got into the market early, the property's gone up in value, the rents have increased, the strategy has covered what you plan to do. Not only is your rental income supporting the loans, covering the loans, potentially supporting part of your holiday, but let's just say you do go overseas for an extended period. You were going for 6 months, but you come back 6 years later. Your portfolio was $2 million when you left, and you're over there drinking piss. You come back 6 years later, and now it's worth $4 million. What a good problem to have. And the repayments have been covered by the rent. So you can never go wrong unless you're advised to buy property in the wrong location because you didn't seek the right advice or do enough research. So, traveling, you go for 6 months, you come back 6 years later. You left with a property portfolio valued at $2 million. You come back 6, 7 years later, the Australian market will deliver. It's now worth $4 million. Good problem to have. The rents will cover your repayments. Whilst you're away, every year, rents go up by CPI or 5%. What another good problem to have. While you're traveling the world, the rents are going up. In addition, your repayments are reducing because you're paying off some of the principal, depending on how you've got your loan set up. It's not such a bad problem to have. By working hard early, making the sacrifices, continuing on to invest is a good thing. But if something goes wrong or you just take a different direction, bricks and mortar is not a bad thing to have. So then on your return, you might decide, I'm done with this property investing. And your portfolio is worth $4 million. When you left, it was worth $2 million. You only had a complete mortgage of $1.5 million. You could potentially sell one property and have no mortgage and a few bucks left over. Good problem to have. You may want to continue to do that traveling or jump into a job. Now that you've come back, your portfolio has doubled or potentially tripled in value. The mortgages are lower because you've paid part of them off. The rental returns are continue to grow because you've purchased in the right area. You might be in a position to buy another property and not be out of pocket. So whatever your journey may be and wherever you go in that next phase, you may want to continue to invest in property. You may want to continue on your traveling around the world journey. But having bricks and mortar is a good, solid foundation. And in the right market, with the right people in your corner, having a portfolio that's continuing to grow, having rental increases year on year, it's definitely not a bad problem to have. Be sure to follow me on I am Anthony Gafa on all my socials, and my podcast can be viewed on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast, and all leading podcast platforms.